I'm happy to join Scott and Sandy in this round table discussion when we're going to talk about leading congregations in mission, which a lot has to do with risk doing something new. And doing something new means that congregations are going to go through transitions when they are grappling with how they did things in the past and how they're going to do things in a new way. And when congregations are in transition, this affects how people think and feel and behave as they experience the change. The challenge for pastor leadership teams is to establish healthy relational approaches to help congregations effectively deal with change and also to continue to move forward in its journey of discovering and joining God in God's future. At the same time, despite best efforts, the pastor leadership team also will need to be prepared to handle feelings of unsettledness and even anger, fear, or apathy. One of the foundational principles for leading congregations in mission is relational. Deepening our relationships is essential to all that we do. So here is my question. What are some proactive approaches or steps that leaders of congregation in mission need to develop and maintain that will provide for this deepening of healthy relationships and also address and recognize the stress and the struggles that exist when dealing with change? Scott, we'd like for you to start our conversation.
Well, so I'm thinking about the qualities of that leadership team and how they come together and how they may want to use vulnerability as kind of a focus point for them with each other, in knowing that that's going to develop into vulnerability to the congregation that they seek to lead. And I think that as the team becomes vulnerable to each other, they are going to become further unified with each other. When I'm telling Sandy about my deepest misgivings, there's a natural response back to me from her. And if we foster that with that team, and that team really begins to feel that, then that is going to spill over into the congregation, and people are going to be invited to that same kind of vulnerability and authenticity with each other that is going to be refreshing and empowering, I think.
Mm-hmm. And it also begins to create safe space.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that conversations don't become vulnerable is because we don't feel safe. Someone's going to judge me, I can't really reveal that, or if I say that, I know I'm the only one who thinks that. So if the leadership team models that, that also can develop that safe environment to really express what I'm thinking and feeling. That's going to be really imperative to that body of people moving together. Yeah.
Tom, having said that, I just want to follow up.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about is not easy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's challenging, and it requires the desire for what the end result will bring. It requires pushing through the resistance, the natural resistance to being vulnerable to others. And so there's a real challenge for the leadership team to overcome. And then there will be a further challenge when that spills over into the congregation too. But I just want to say that it's so worth that, because that feeling of unity is so empowering for what lies ahead.
Mm-hmm. I think, vulnerability is simply taking time to share oneself and to take time to know others.
Absolutely.
That's.
Yeah. Another word that comes to mind, actually a couple words, but I'll start with one, is transparency.
Yeah.
So transparency, I think, adds another dimension, and that is if the leadership team doesn't know the answer or needs to do further research or whatever it is, but to be able to say it, not to just keep it to themselves and to maintain what probably our past examples and models have been of leadership is that we are strong, we know all, we can take care of it. And it draws the group in with us, just like you said. So we're in this together. It's not about one set of people who have all the answers, or God only speaks to them, and we share the message then with the broader group. So I think being transparent about where we are, what we know, or what we're seeking, or I think that also helps to build trust. And that's the other word that I think is really important. There is a concept that really has caught me that I think really connects well with the dynamics of our congregations, and that is the concept of thick and thin trust. So are we okay to go there, Tom?
Absolutely. That's interesting.
All right. So it's found in this book, Difficult Conversations by Katie Day. And a guy by the name of Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And he presented this concept of social capital. And that in years past, social capital occurs and it develops by people coming together and are socializing for all sorts of reasons. So in our churches, we used to do that. We used to do lots of potlucks and stick around and hang on after the potluck. We'd visit in each other's homes. We'd get together for game nights. We'd do all sorts of connecting birthdays with each other in which our lives were more deeply known and connected. And so our foibles were more aware. And so they weren't things that maybe created such irritations as when coming together just for an hour of church might happen for us. And that has created what he names as thick trust. And so when we get into difficult conversations or things that cause us to be vulnerable or to risk, that deep layer of relationship then allows us to stay together in the midst of those conversations. But today's world, we don't spend that kind of time with each other. And so he says, really, most of us are living with relationships that are on thin trust. It's sort of like walking on thin ice. If we get to a place that's too thin, we go through and we're no longer sustained or held together. We're simply struggling to survive, and sometimes not. So I think a really important piece is developing that sense of safe environment, of trust of each other, because we know each other well enough and deep enough that will sustain us.
Yeah, and as you share that, I mean, I get excited about the round table, and we're sitting at a round table. And we have one of the missional practices that we call sharing in the round. And its only purpose is for people to gather together to get to know one another. And that is such a critical aspect of leading congregations in mission.
Can I say just a few words about that?
Sure.
I think there's just this pervasive, deep hunger that we have for that kind of connection that we're not really sure how to satisfy. We look for it in various ways in our lives. We try to find it online with the ways that we connect with other people. But there is something in sitting close and sharing deeply with people that is not accomplished in any other way, but being present with each other and listening deeply to each other. And so it's critical. It's absolutely critical that we do this part of it all the time. Not once, but all the time.
It's continuous.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a theologian, Carl Pinnock, who I was reading for one of the classes I was taking, and he talks about the Holy Spirit. One of the jobs of the Holy Spirit is to connect human heart with human heart. I just love that
it too,
concept.
yeah.
And so that's what happens in that table experience is the Holy Spirit has the opportunity to really work in connecting us in our relationships. And so giving the Holy Spirit more opportunity to do the work it's meant to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as pastor leadership teams, we implement and develop approaches that create these healthy relationships. We are vulnerable to one another. We get to know one another. And yet, despite all of our good efforts, there are those moments when we have to deal with criticism or negative reactions to our leadership. How do you handle that?
Well, if you're asking me how
Yeah.
I handle it, the words of Jean-Paul Lederach come to my mind, and he said something that penetrated my heart. He was talking about Jesus, and when Jesus encountered conflict, he turned toward it. And as he said those words, it changed me. And I went back into my life after listening to those words, and I practiced that simple movement of turning towards the conflict and bringing my whole self into that moment with all of the generosity and all of the presence that I can bring, deeply listening to those things that are difficult, and then in that moment, also being acutely aware of what it is that belongs to me in those words and in that exchange.
What emotions belong to you too?
Right. And what belong to the other. It's a profound practice that has served me well, and I would offer it to pastor leadership teams to experiment with.
You know, again, as you share that, I am now realizing that allows people to be vulnerable by turning to and receiving their criticism rather than rejecting it. Yeah. And Sandy, how do you handle it?
I think that's just brilliant to bring that up, because that really is an important thing for leaders to even ask for differences. So usually, if we're in a meeting and if people kind of are along with us, and that feels okay and good, but to say, is there anyone who has a differing thought, a different perspective, another way of looking at this, and drawing that in, that helps to create the safe space that says it's okay if we're not all on the same page, and that we won't be judged or considered crazy or out of line if in fact, because as a leader, of course, it's how we receive it too that's important. So if as a leader I'm asking for differing opinions and someone offers one, I say, oh, right, then that's never going to happen again. So I have to be prepared to be able to hear it, and just like you said, walk towards it and be open to it. That makes a huge difference. When people say things like that to me, it's tough, because I want to be perfect. And so when someone has something that they think I haven't done exactly right, it's really hard to hear. But what I try to do is focus on what that person's saying, and my focus then becomes them rather than on what's going on inside of me. And that really helps me be able to be present for them, not to judge what they're saying, but to acknowledge it and to give it space.
Tom, there's another part of this too. Sometimes people express their opposition by retreating or being silent or moving to the edges. And so in those situations, I think the appropriate thing for pastor leadership teams to do is to actively go for those people and solicit their thoughts and opinions and engage them in an organic kind of way. I don't know if I were on the fringe, if someone came over and kind of gratuitously asked me for things, how willing I would be to share. It has to be, can we have coffee together? Or would you come to my home for dinner?
Yeah.
It has to be that kind of a heartfelt, authentic invitation. Right. I'm interested in you and what you think.
Another proactive kind of way of dealing with some resistance and the silence maybe or the withdrawal that people might exhibit in the process would be there are formal authorities in our congregations, and then there are informal authorities and people that others look to for their wisdom, or they've got a foundation of power for whatever reason in the congregation, but they don't have a official title behind their name. And so if and every congregation has them, to identify who they are, and if there is a conversation coming up where in fact you realize that they could pull the rug out if they're not supportive, or they could create a higher degree of resistance, going to those persons and having conversations and saying, we're thinking about doing this, would like to hear your thoughts, questions, wisdom, can really help draw them in, because for the most part, what it's all about is being acknowledged and recognized. And if that's occurring authentically and sincerely, then the resistance that might occur because they haven't been filled in on what's going on may be lessened.
Hey, thank you for this great conversation about leading congregations in mission. When we think about leading mission, we think about that mission is relational, mission is risking something new, mission is disruptive, and mission is a long journey in the same direction. And we need to remember that the Holy Spirit will be with us on this journey. Thanks for sharing.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thanks.